All right, environmental scientists. Today I'm going to go over an introduction to manipulating data sets in Excel, some of the things we can do to kind of import, clean up, organize data, how we use formulas in Excel, making some simple figures, and transferring those figures over so that we can put them into PowerPoint or put them into Word and alter them. And the whole point of this is because this is one of the skills that employers are going to expect you to have. Excel is a very commonly used spreadsheet data analysis program. And if you'll notice on a lot of the job applications that you guys were looking at, it's one of the, Microsoft Office programs you're expected to be able to use some of these Microsoft Office programs for most of the jobs that you guys were looking at. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to start by downloading a data set. And I'm going to share my screen here. And the data set that I want to use is from the National Atmospheric Deposition Program. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to search NADP and scroll down to this National Atmospheric Deposition Program. And these guys have a nationwide monitoring network for measuring the sorts of chemicals that are present in our precipitation. So it started when acid rain was a big issue, acid precipitation, and they've continued measuring these components in rainwater and snow all across the US since I believe the mid-70s. They measure other things like mercury, but what we're going to be looking at today is their data set on common ions in rainwater. So what I want to do is go to this Maps and Data tab, go down to the NTN data, which is their National Trends Network data. And I want to retrieve data from all sites. I'm going to select the annual averages for the calendar year. And then you can see I've got two options here. I've got precipitation weighted mean concentrations and annual depositions. We're going to use the first one, precipitation weighted mean concentrations. And I've got a data file here that is a .csv file, which stands for comma separated values. And then I've got the metadata file, which is a PDF. I'm going to look at that real quick because any data set that you're working with or any data set that you publish going forward, you should really have a metadata file that explains to the user what is contained in that file. So if we look at the metadata file here, it tells us we've got all of these different fields, what the type of data in that field would be, and then it gives us a little bit of a description. So we know that the column for site ID is a character with four character string. So it's going to have four alphanumeric characters in there, and that this is the code that they use to identify each individual site. And then I've got some things down here like criteria 1, 2, and 3. And that doesn't really tell me much just in the name itself. So I would have to come to this metadata file to understand that criteria 1 means the percentage of summary period for which there are valid samples. And I see I've got all of these ions here: calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, ammonium, nitrate, chloride, sulfate, bromide, pH. I've got a value for conductivity, this SVOL, which is the sample volume, total volume measured, and then PPT, the total amount of precipitation. There are some other columns in the data set down here, and we're not really going to use them, but If you wanted to know what they mean, you could come to the metadata file, figure that out. All right, so let's go back and we're going to download this data file, ntn-all-cy.csv. And I'm going to open this up. And I've got mine set to open up in Excel. So all CSV files automatically default to open in Excel. If you don't have that option, one of the easiest ways to open this would be, I'm going to open up a new workbook here, and then I can navigate to where I downloaded this. So I'll go to my downloads folder, and let's see. Where would it be? Let's go and organize these by date. List. I have a lot of things in the downloads, apparently. Maybe I can just scroll over and find it real quick. The ends. Okay, here we go. And just read. Let's see. Okay, so here's my ntn-all-cy, and it's the third time I've downloaded it. So if I just drag this over to Excel, to this open workbook, it imports it there. So Excel knows how to open comma-separated value files. Okay, so I've got my where'd you go? Sorry, I just closed it there. Let me reopen that. Okay, so here's the data file we're working with. Now I'm going to go through a number of different things that we can do to organize and work with the data here. So the first thing that we need to know, and I'm going to assume here that you know nothing about Excel. So we're going to start with the very basics. Each one of these rectangles here is called a cell. And each cell is designated by a column letter and a row number. So this cell here is cell A1. This cell here is B1. Down here is B2, and so on and so forth. And if we want to refer back to these cells, that's the designator that we're going to use in formulas that we're going to talk about coming up. Also, in organizing this, down at the bottom, you can see there's this little plus icon here, and we can make a new sheet within this workbook. So each one of these tabs here is called a worksheet, and the whole file is called a workbook. So this is useful if we want to take a subset of our data, put it into a new worksheet, and do some different calculations on it. Okay, so navigating around here, there are a bunch of ways we can do this. You know, we can scroll up and down using the scroll on the mouse. We can use our arrow keys on the keyboard to move around. But let's say, and you know, we can use the navigation bars over on the sides here to scroll up and down as well. But let's say we wanted to figure out how many columns of data we had here. And we just want to do this really quickly. I could go over here and scroll all the way down. And I see that I've got 8,778. But I generally prefer to navigate a little bit different. So what I use is the control key on my keyboard. And for Mac users, that would be the Open Apple key. And the arrow keys. So if I hold down control and press down, it takes me all the way down to the bottom of this column. And I don't have to go over and you know, drag the scroll bar up and down. So if I press control and the right arrow key now, it takes me all the way to the right of this data block. So what this does is it takes you to the next cell that is filled with something before a cell that's unfilled. So it'll take me to the end of the row or end of the column of contiguous data. So if I press Control right one more time, it takes me all the way to the right-hand side of the data set, of the worksheet. And if I press Control left, it brings me back to the filled column here. So, you know, get used to navigating around your data sets with these Control arrow key moves, because they'll save you a lot of time in the long run. Another useful thing here is if I wanted to select an entire column of data, there are a couple ways I could do this. I could come up here and I could click on the column. So I'm clicking on the letter G up here for column G, and it selects the entire column. And if we scroll down, we'll see that this not only selects all the data, but it selects all the way down to the end of the worksheet, which I may not want to do. Maybe I only want all of the filled cells here. So again, using that Control arrow key, now I'm going to press Control and Shift, hold those two keys down, and I'll press down. And that takes me just to the bottom of the column of data and selects everything in there. And now I can copy this, move it around, do whatever I need to do with it. If I wanted to select the whole data set here, I would use Control Shift, and I'd press down, and then I'd press right. I've got this whole block of data. Another way to do that is with the Select All command, and the shortcut for that is Control A. So if I press Control A, it selects this entire block of data. Okay, some other things we might want to do. Sometimes for organization's sake or to make space for calculations, we might want to insert a row or column into the data set. To do that, I'm going to again select all of column G. I'm going to right click and select Insert. Now that makes a column to the left of the column that I had selected. So maybe I want to do another one over here. If I want to insert a row, the same thing. It's going to insert a row above whichever row I select. So let's say I want to make a row between this AG and AB. So if I click Insert Now, it makes a row above the row that I had selected. If I want to insert multiple rows, I can select a whole bunch, right click and insert, and it'll insert a whole block of rows equal to the number of rows that I had selected. All right, now let's say I don't want these guys. I can come back in here and select them all, right click and delete. Delete the row that or the column that I added here the same way. Okay, you can do that with columns that are filled as well. So let's say I don't want these criteria. Come in here, right click and delete them. If I don't want to delete them, but I still don't want to see them, my other option here is I can right click and hide them. Now you can see there's this kind of like collapsed little cells squished between cell C or column C and column G. And all the data are still there, they're just not visible to me. So if I want to see them again, I right click and unhide. I have to select both columns here, right click and unhide. And then they show back up. Another useful tool for navigating around a data set is, let's say I'm really only interested in the site ID and the year, and then the column headers, and I want to see those no matter where I scroll on the screen. So then I would come in here and I'm going to use the freeze panes option here. So I select the cell that is below and to the right of where I want to freeze. So I want to freeze this top row, and I want to freeze everything to the left of the year column. So I'm going to select cell D2 here, and I'm going to come up to View, and then go to Freeze Panes. And we have a couple of options here. We could just freeze the top row, just freeze the first column. But the one that I use most often is this just freeze panes, and it's going to keep the rows above the cell that I've selected and to the left of the cells I've selected. So now you can see it kind of added these extra gray bars here. So now when I scroll over, no matter what I'm looking at, it keeps those first three columns. And if I scroll down all the way to the bottom, I can still see the column headers up here, which is useful when we're moving around a large data set. We might not remember which column corresponds to which variable. Okay, so one of the other things that we typically do in large data sets is we might have to identify some placeholder values. So you'll see in the bromide column here, we've got all these -9s. They didn't measure negative bromide. This -9 just means that no data were reported for this ion for that sample. And if we were to scroll through some of these others, it's not just bromide. We see some -9s for entire sites for entire years, meaning that there were just no measurements reported for that site. So they measured the total amount of precipitation, but they didn't measure any ions in that sample. Now, if we were going to go and calculate like the average of this column, all those -9s would be included. We don't want that. So there are a couple ways that we can identify these -9s and get rid of them. One of the ways we could do that is just visually. If we had a smaller data set, sometimes this is pretty easy. I'm going to select all of our numerical data here. Then I'm going to come up to my Home tab, go to this Conditional Formatting tab. And I'm going to use the Highlight Cells rule. And I'm going to say highlight cells that are less than, and the number I'm going to pick is 0. So cells less than 0, we're going to highlight them with light red fill and dark red text. You can see all these values for bromide are instantly highlighted. And then if we were to start scrolling down, you see all these rows with -9s are highlighted. And we could go through by hand and delete all these -9s, but because we've got a pretty large data set here, that would take me forever, and I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the find and replace command. And there are a couple ways to get to this. There's the find and select button up here on the Home tab. And we could go down to replace. Another way to get to it is just use the Control F shortcut, and it brings up the same window. So here we can just find values. And if I do this -9 here, so I want to find all the values that are -9, it'll just take me through. If I keep clicking find next, it's just taking me down this column here and showing me where all the -9s are. If I click find all, it's going to take a little while to do this, but it'll show me all the cells that have -9s in them here down below in the little window down here. But really what I want to do is just get rid of these -9s. So I'm going to come over to the replace tab. And right now I could replace these with anything. I could say NA, I could say no measure. But what I want to do right now, because I'm going to do some calculations on these, is I'm going to replace with blanks. So I'm going to say take all the -9s, replace all of them with blank cells, and just click replace all. Okay, so you can see that when we use replace all, it went through and replaced everything that had a -9 in it with a blank. And now we've got, it made 9,074 replacements, which would have taken me forever to do that by hand. So I'll say okay here, close out. And now I've got no -9s in the entire data set. And you can see it basically eliminated the entire bromide column. So for the sake of convenience going forward, I'm just going to delete the bromide column. Okay, so other things that are useful in organizing our data set are sorting based on different factors to try and parse out different sets of data. So maybe we want to find all of the most recent data. So maybe we want everything from the year 2019, which is the last data that they have reported in the data set here. So I can use this sort and filter option up here. So I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to use the custom sort option here. So if I go in here, I can tell Excel to sort by any of my column names. So if I click on this, my data has headers option up here, it recognizes this first row as the headers for the columns. If I unclick this, it's going to try and sort those along with the values, which we don't want. So I want to make sure that's clicked. And now let's say I want to sort by year. So I'm going to use sort by year. And I don't want smallest to largest, I want largest to smallest. I'll click OK. All right, now it's organized everything by year. And I've got 2019 up at the top, and you can see each line is for a different site. So it's taken all the sites that have measurements in 2019 and put them all up at the top here. Now I could scroll down and see how many that would be. And we've got 258 entries for 2019, different sites. So that's one way to organize data. Also within this sort and filter custom sort dialog, we can sort by year. And then let's say I wanted to know, I wanted to see the highest sulfate value reported in 2019. So then I'm going to add another level. And I'm going to first sort by year, then sort by sulfate. And let's go largest to smallest again. Okay, so now I've got everything still 2019 up at the top here, but it's reorganized the sites so they're not in alphabetical order. Instead, I can see that BC22 had the highest reported sulfate value, 1.539 milligrams per liter. So a couple ways to sort data there. All right, I'm going to undo those two. So we get back to the original data set here. And then I'm going to show you another way to select different data sets within the overall data file. So again, using that sort and filter option here, I'm going to click on filter. Now it adds these little drop-down arrows to everything in, or every one of my column headers. So now if I go in under year, click on that drop-down arrow, I've got the option to sort large to small, which I could do that. Or I've got the option to come down below here and select individual years. So let's say I just wanted data from 1978. I can unselect all of them, select 1978, and click OK. And now I can see that there were only 21 sites here that reported data for 1978. So the network started with only 21 sites. Interestingly enough, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those were in North Carolina. So this is using the filter tool. I'm going to go back into the year here and select all, get the entire data set back. So it doesn't delete any data. All the data are still there. It just hides everything except the data that you've selected. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the site closest to us, which is NC34. So I'm going to scroll down, or I can use the search bar here and just type NC34. There it is. Okay, so now I've got all the data just for this one site, NC34. And what I'm going to do now is, let's say I was really interested in just looking at temporal trends at this one particular site. I could do a bunch of stuff in this worksheet here, but sometimes it's easier for me to just take this entire block of data, copy it, there we go, copy. So I can right click and select copy, or I can use Control-C as my keyboard shortcut. I'm going to put this in the new sheet that I created. Come in here and I can paste. And now it's just pasted in the data that I had selected. So now it's actually gotten rid of everything except for site NC34 in this new worksheet. I can come down here and rename this by double clicking. I'm going to call this NC34. All right, so I could make tabs for any number of different sites I wanted, data from different years, just by using that filter, copy and paste.